want development. For 20 years, they've blockade. They've been successful, not allowing logging in our territory.
Tonight, First Nations take to Queen's Park to say no to mining in their territory.
I think there's a strong sense of relief that these ancestors will be able to come home.
Plus, remains once held at a university museum will be coming home.
I kept hearing him call me. It was like a cry. I would hear him, "Mom, come get me now."
And the family of a missing BC man is desperate to find him. Good evening, Tansei Anin. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. Things are heating up over Ontario Premier Doug Ford's plans to bulldoze his way into developing the Ring of Fire in Ontario's north. Here's Annette Francis with that story.
I would ask our guests who are in the gallery to refrain from...
Cries of defiance rained down upon Ontario politicians Thursday morning from leaders sitting in the visitors' gallery who represent 5 northern First Nations. Security had to escort a couple of them out.
Doug Ford, you come and meet me.
You're not accessing our traditional homeland. You're not crossing the river system. You're not going to cross the river system.
You're not crossing out of the river.
It happened just before Ontario NDP MP Saul Mamakwa asked the government about consequences of exploration and mining.
Let me be clear, these 5 First Nations who traveled thousands of kilometers to be here are the ones that have to live with the mess that is left behind after mining. Their children, their grandchildren will have to drink the water downstream.
Indigenous Affairs Minister Greg Rickford provided the answer, referencing an agreement made 3 weeks earlier, where Ontario accepted an environmental assessment by the Webquay and Martin Falls First Nations to build an all-season road to the Ring of Fire.
Mr. Speaker, and I can tell you, they all want better infrastructure. They all, for the most part, want road access to improve the health, social, and economic opportunities for their communities. That's what a provincial government does, Mr. Speaker.
The same morning before question period, leadership explained their concerns during a press conference.
The Ring of Fire is something that's being fast-tracked without the involvement of our people. More importantly, without the informed participation and informed consent of our people. And that's a very troubling situation for our people, and it's a concern.
The chief of Grassy Narrows warned about development without consent. His community continues to suffer from mercury poisoning, although from the discharge of wastewater from a pulp mill and not mining.
Want development. For 20 years, they've blockade. They've been successful, not allowing logging in our territory. And now we've got this issue of mining and people staking and making claims on our land without the consent of Grassy Narrows.
Ketchimakusa Beninawag Band Councillor Cecilia Bagg says the past is repeating itself. In 2008, Bagg and 5 other leaders from KI were jailed for opposing mineral exploration on their lands. She said they were protecting their land and water for future generations.
The government didn't see that. We were also their treaty partner, and they mistreated us. They haven't apologized, and they are still doing the same thing, pushing their agenda, encroaching our lands. Even though people say, they say no, and that no means no.
Minister Rickford's office responded to APTN News with an emailed statement. In part, it says, from the outset, we have focused on consensus building in relation to resource projects and legacy infrastructure in Northern Ontario. Our government will meet its constitutional duty to consult while we continue this important work. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Toronto.
5 people have been arrested in Wet'suwet'en territory today. Unverified videos sent to APTN News show RCMP officers serving a search warrant. It refers to theft under $5,000 and seeks the recovery of evidence including a chainsaw. The checkpoint statement calls it a large-scale action by the RCMP's Community Industry Response Group, or CIRG, a secretive unit being investigated by the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission for the RCMP. But BC RCMP said in a statement the action is related to an alleged swarming incident where a Coastal GasLink worker was intimidated on March 26th of this year. His vehicle was allegedly accessed and a chainsaw stolen. And we certainly hope to have more on this for you tomorrow. The Trudeau government released its budget on Tuesday, but with less spending on Indigenous priorities than in previous years. And stakeholders are not only unhappy with the amount, but also with how it's being invested. APTN's Fraser Needham has more.
In last year's budget, the Liberals announced $4 billion over 7 years for Indigenous housing. And on Tuesday, they announced the same $4 billion over 7 years again. The only difference is the actual spending won't begin until 2024 instead of 2022. This Indigenous housing advocate says his organization is getting tired of government announcements and wants to see action.
Not $1, even from last year's budget. $300 million that's been announced. Not $1 has been implemented. Not one Indigenous person living in an urban, rural, or northern housing area has benefited from last year's federal budget announcement.
The National Association of Friendship Centres agrees it is not nearly enough.
What's announced is nowhere near the matching the need. And so we'll have to spend some time thinking through how do we actually fill that gap, right? The National Housing Council has made their recommendations. They've costed it out. There's numbers out there that are rooted in reality.
Also in yesterday's budget, an investment of $123 million over 5 years was announced for a national action plan to act on the calls to justice in the MMIG inquiry's final report. Though Paktuktuk Inuit Women of Canada believes the government has waited too long, its president, Jerry Sharp, says the funding is a step in the right direction.
Tragically, our women's families and communities continue to pay the cost for this inaction. In yesterday's budget, there was a focus on increased monitoring and reporting, so Paktuktuk is hopeful these accountability measures will increase progress.
But the Native Women's Association of Canada isn't quite so optimistic. In a press release, NWAC CEO Ling Grew says, "With words but no actions, this government continues to show Canadians Indigenous women simply are not a priority." Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
All right, we have to step aside for a moment here, but first, here's Lee Wilson with a quick look at what he's working on.
I'm Lee Wilson. There is a growing housing crisis in northern BC. Lake Babine Nation members say they're waiting years for renovations. It's so bad, this member uses a shed for her belongings.
I had a rough time. Sometimes I don't even eat, I just go to bed. I get tired of looking for stuff outside.
Band councillors are raising the alarm as black mold, sewage backups, and fire hazards mount.
Tired of begging for things. We shouldn't have to beg. We should be treated equal. Each community should be treated equal.
This story coming soon on APTN National News.
Welcome back to APTN National News. The remains of 3 ancestors are coming home to Medicine Hat later this year. Sav Jones has more on how the repatriation will take place.
The ancestral remains of an Indigenous woman and 2 children spent half a century at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. Now, they're set to be reburied in Medicine Hat.
Folks have known about these remains being held at the University of Alberta really for decades. And I think there's a strong sense of relief that these ancestors will be able to come home and be repatriated in a really respectful manner.
Lee Presteko is a director of community development for the city of Medicine Hat. They're partnering with the University of Alberta and the Meowson Friendship Center to return the remains. Meowson's executive director, Jeanette Hansen, has been working on the project for 30 years.
And I heard the stories of the bodies that were removed from the hillside, and also that there were other remains along the railroad tracks. So the question to us was, where did these remains go? Like, what happened to them?
The ancestors were excavated from a hill above Saratoga Park in 1967, roughly 80 years after being buried. The area was officially recognized as a Métis settlement site in 2021.
So now we have that opportunity to say, this is how we want it done. This is the process. This is what we're going to incorporate into our ceremonies. And it involves not just Indigenous people in Medicine Hat, but because this was a gathering place for millennia, it involves, the Blood, the Blackfoot, the Cree, Stoney Nakoda.
Consultations with these communities will determine how and when the reburial will take place.
The consultation will be what directs us in terms of how the remains should be transported, how they should be handled, how they should be cared for, and how they should be reburied, as well as then what does that activity look like? What does the celebration look like afterwards in the community?
Hansen hopes their success can lead others as calls for repatriation of artifacts and ancestral remains grows.
I'm hoping that, what we're doing here in Medicine Hat, we're not the only place that people can have this opportunity in their own communities for healing and reconciliation. And if they want to see an example of what works, just come to Medicine Hat.
Sav Jonesa, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
The search for a missing 24-year-old man is intensifying in a small town in rural British Columbia. APTN's Tina House was there and has this story.
It's been a nightmare. It's not something that any parent should go through. I wait. I lay awake. I can't sleep. I keep expecting him to come in the door.
Marcella Mack is the mother of 4 boys, and she and her family are clinging to hope as they await answers as to what happened to her son, 24-year-old Miguel Mack. He vanished without a trace on February the 27th of this year, and was last seen at this 7-Eleven store in downtown Merritt, sometime in the afternoon.
A few days had gone by, and I noticed there was no social media activity, and I was getting worried, and I had messaged his girlfriend, and I said I still haven't heard from Miguel, and she still hadn't either. And then Friday came, and I said, it's been too long. It's been 5 days. I'm not okay. So I made the call to the police to see if they can go and check on him. And everywhere that I had gone or the police had gone, they hadn't heard from him in days.
His mother says it's unusual for him to be gone this long without being in contact with anyone. She says he was a devoted young father of a 2-year-old boy and expecting another baby any day now.
He was actually supposed to leave to go and be with his girlfriend to wait the arrival of the baby. And she's due pretty quick. And he was pretty excited about that.
So this is not something that he'd miss, obviously?
No. He was really excited to go and be with her.
She says throughout his life he did struggle with addiction, but he always came home.
He would disappear for a few days, but nothing more. It was sometimes maybe a week or 2, but there was always contact, and we always knew where he was. He would be at a friend's place, or he would always say, because it was a rule we had, that no matter what he was doing or where he was, that he would check in. And After 3 days, he didn't check in at all.
His little brother Casey says they are trying to do whatever it takes to find his older brother. They even set up a vigil in their home for Miguel.
These signs were made by family, and they're meant for like stopping drug deals and how bad it is, and we're losing our children and all that. So it's sad, and if you come walk over here, this is his favorite. He loved his jerseys and whatnot, and his sweater, his shoes.
The RCMP Serious Crimes Division have now taken over the case, but Miguel's mom says she isn't satisfied with the police response.
I feel that when I very first told them that he was missing and some of those homes to check, I feel that they didn't act on that right away, and it took too long. I did tell them my concerns, and when they released that there may have been criminality, we didn't know that. We didn't know that until it came out.
Marcella alleges it was another news station that actually broke that news to her, not the police. However, they did release a statement that they have deployed police dog services, air support, drones, forensic identification, and assisted family members and volunteers in extensive ground searches. Miguel Mack is 5'10", 200 pounds, black hair with brown eyes. His tattoos include a tiger on his neck, the year 1949 on his knuckles, a bear paw on his hand, and Medusa on his other hand. He was last seen wearing this burgundy Section 35 hoodie and dark pants and a dark toque. His mother says the first few weeks she had dreams about him.
I kept hearing him call me. It was like a cry. I would hear him, "Mom, come get me now. Mom, I'm sorry." And I felt that he was scared or that he was cold. And I kept being worried about him being hungry. The hardest part is just not knowing where he is, if he's alive or not.
In part 2 of this story, we take a closer look at the search for Miguel Mack and how they turned this once quiet home into a command center. Tina House, APTN National News, Merritt.
All right, we have to put a pause on the news one more time briefly. Still to come, a story about a mentorship program bringing Indigenous dancers together. Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. Today's photo comes from regular contributor Gail French. Gail captured this absolutely magnificent photo of the moon, stars, and a couple other planets, all from her front porch in Chippewa of the Thames First Nation in Ontario. That is a magnificent shot there, Gail. If you want to be featured as our photo of the day, you can email your submissions to share@aptn.ca, or you can tag APTN News on Instagram. All right, now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. We begin on the East Coast, 4 degrees in St. John's and 5 in Charlottetown. -1 in Cartwright and +1 in Happy Valley Goose Bay. -3 in Quebec City and 0 degrees in Montreal. 6 in Toronto and 4 in clear in London. 1 degree in Timmins and 1 degree in snow in Wawa. -15 in Churchill and -5 in God's Lake. Some snow and -3 in Barons River and -2 in Winnipeg. -1 in Yorkton and -1 in Saskatoon. -4 in snow in Buffalo Narrows and -8 in Stony Rapids. As we head west, a -6 in snow in Fort Chipewyan and -2 in Fort McMurray. 1 degree in Edmonton and snowing in Calgary is looking at +4. 13 degrees in Vancouver and 13 in clear in Bella Coola. 10 degrees in clear in Smithers and Fort Nelson's looking at +1 in snow. 0 degrees in snow in Beaver Creek and -10 in Rock River. -9 in Norman Wells and clear in -9 in Yellowknife. -12 in Inuvik and Colville Lake is -13 in clear. Cambridge Bay is looking at minus 22 and Chesterfield minus 18 in snow. Minus 20 in snow in Arctic Bay and minus 10 in snow in Iqaluit. A national mentorship program gathers young Indigenous dancers together to earn high school credits and lift each other up. CTV's Taylor Brock has this story.
Cadence Keeper has traveled to Winnipeg to dance with other Indigenous youth for the first time.
It feels amazing. Like, I've always wanted to dance with other people other than being just me by myself.
Keeper is part of a countrywide mentorship program for Indigenous youth called Outside Looking In as a future leader. It helps youth get off on the right foot in more than one way.
Earn a high school credits and to empower themselves and learn a dance piece that they can perform at our annual showcase.
They are preparing for one of the largest dance gatherings in Canada put on by OLI.
It's like really fun and like improves your mental health and motivation and all that. I feel like I'd be in a much worse position if it wasn't for OLI.
It's about more than learning choreography.
So this week we're going to different colleges and universities and including entrepreneurship courses, having guest speakers come in and talk to them and share their experience.
Tyson Gishik says that the social skills he's learning here will last him a lifetime.
It's like an amazing bonding experience because we're like learning together and it's like they put us through like these hard workouts.
Those bonds reach back home.
As I'm here, like with the program and everything, I'm actually doing it for my friends who can't.
And when she gets home to Keachcombs near Thunder Bay, she hopes she can share what she's learned and keep dancing. Taylor Brock, CTV News, Winnipeg.
This Friday is National Indigenous Languages Day. Across Canada, there are more than 70 Indigenous languages with over 200,000 speakers. This week on In Focus, we looked at a few of those languages, including one that has been declared extinct. Here's a look at today's episode.
There's a healing process when reclaiming our language. So many things that were done intentionally and unintentionally to take the language away. And so it's an empowering and decolonizing for those who are actively trying to do that.
You is Gina and me is Nina. And dance, everybody knows dance, hello. And we've added dance, Gina, how are you? Mona Nato is the reply of, I'm okay, I'm fine.
The word extinct is a violent word. And oftentimes, in relation with the language, it gets extended to ourselves as people and our culture and our ways of being.
When we get a project like this and building a type of momentum, we can sort of build it together and give ourselves that pride and understanding of who we are and how we understand how we belong to the land we live on.
All right, that's all we have for you tonight on APTN National News. If you missed any of our stories tonight and you want to catch up, our website, aptnnews.ca, has you covered. For all of us here, I'm Daryl Stranger. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night.